folks, Doc Stars here. So the 2 hour, just over 2 hour webinar describing the dangers and opportunities for October is now up. Thank you to the members that basically financed the production of that, covered my cost of time, effort, etc. You can access that through the private link. You can find in the comments section below how to access that. But I wanted to just say, in this video, we're going to be taking a look at some, not all, of the highlights. We're going to present some of the details. There's a lot more information in the full webinar, with a list of the most critical dates that are, the hazardous dates and also the ones for opportunity. One of the things that's important is, I know a lot of you have been following and supporting me for some time, and I wanted to share, at least some of the most important information in this brief video. So we're going to cover some highlights, and I wanted to bring your attention to two of the dates. We've got a number of dates that you should be aware of, but two of the dates especially are pretty critical. So first one is the new moon. This is a big one. It's pretty important. You want to get your swing down right. And then the next one is it's roughly between the 21st to the 23rd. We're going to see a peak of the energy on the 23rd. It's going to be coming in on the 22nd. That's a challenging date basically for the whole planet. Some places will be affected a bit more severely. Some different types of people will be affected more than others. But there's a really good chance that the average person could get caught up in it. So we're going to talk about that a little bit and just, the kinds of things that you should be aware of. So we've got about 46 minutes extracted from the full, just over 2 hour webinar. I've just sequenced it out. There's different segments to the video from the webinar. And there's a pretty good amount of information that details the threat for October 23rd. And then we also get into the new moon. In the full webinar, you'll have access to all of the information. My suggestion is consider getting that webinar so that you're well equipped and you're well prepared for what's coming up. But this brief video that contains some of the critical segments from the webinar should help you. It'll certainly do to have this information so that you can at least prepare yourself for two of those critical dates. So enjoy. Again, you can access the full webinar if you look at the comment section in the video below, and I wish everyone good luck. Okay, so we're going to go over the most important dates happening in October. We'll give you the exact dates of the influences and then a description as to what the potential opportunities or hazards might be. And I'm going to be looking at this time period from more than one model. So, we've talked about the parallax view before. Basically, we're looking at the same time period, but from different sort of perspectives. So we'll be including different kinds of astrological perspectives. And I'll also be providing a number of links and making recommendations for additional information. So I'm going to give a precursor before we get right into the dates as to the nature of sort of the background scene, the circumstance that's playing out collectively. And I think one of the key points here is returning to your sense of, individual orientation, direction, and, he uses the word sovereignty, and I think that that's appropriate. So we've got a big kind of a magic window that opens there, and this energy that comes in the 20th. I'm going to come back over these dates just to emphasize some of this again and detail some more things. Now, right around the 22nd and 23rd, he says centering on the 23rd, And he doesn't know exactly when it starts coming in. But again, like I said, probably 22nd. On the 23rd, it will be at its peak force. Imagine it. But the backdrop of the collective mind changes and it becomes tyrannical, power crazy. It's like a tyrant demanding to be in charge, and it no longer likes the higher energies. Its nature becomes grotesque, and it begins to demand obedience, and it wants lots of attention. And part of the nature of that energy is it's like a low, murky, soppy, good. It's a destroyer of good times. It's dull convention. It's mean and smug. It wants to be in charge. It's basically a Karen. Um, they'll have a sense of being holier than thou. They'll have a sense of false self-righteous, arrogance. They'll be dumb. They'll actually be pretty dumb, like ignorant. But it will demonstrate a lot of power, and it will manifest this in forceful, probably expressions, certainly ideas, and it's on a collision course with the trend of harmony. We'll see this on the world stage through the different planes, economics, politics, social, likely within our local private space. He didn't mention this, but based on some of the other models and views I'm looking at, I would expect that there's potentially a good chance of conflict. Like it could actually be conflict, and we could also see, some kind of environmental hazard. I don't know if it would be like a storm or something like that, but to give you an idea, um, we've got some pretty strong energies coming in that are really dense, and I'll be talking about this a bit more in the following parts of this video. We can see the energies landing close to Washington, D.C. So we've got the Mars ascendant and we've got the Sun descendants. We've got a conjunct happening there pretty soon. But what's weird, and I mentioned this to one of my associates who'll be in the video later, you see the ascendant is one of the four corners. So we've got two opposite ends of the horizon here. But now when we go to China, we see that we've got a similar combination happening right across the other side of the world. And it's the opposite polarity to what's happening in the States. So that's very weird. So we've got Mars ascendant in DC, Washington, DC. So what that basically means is it's a polarized connection because you've got two opposite ends of the horizon, the ascendant and the descendant meeting. Now, I'm not saying that I think there's going to be necessarily conflict between China and the U.S. I'm just saying that there's a huge chance of some kind of. My mentor says basically one of the ways or one of the things that will help us when we're dealing with this, environmental stress is. And it might now, around that time of the 22nd, 23rd, there's a risk that the collective will try to intercept that. Probably you'll experience that in your own life. Very likely you'll see this dynamic playing out on the world stage. And what they'll try to do is introduce noise. It'll be distortion. It'll be like a gross, dirty form of what was there. And so what you want to do is, but you can expect that there'll be like, basically it's like a garbage pit that's boiling over and it's going to explode from the collective mind. And there's a very fine line of balance that you have to keep from not becoming overwhelmed by that. And so what you want to do is try to, but there's help coming to a lot of people that are trying to get into that higher path, and it'll seem like the source is unknown. It'll be like a spark out of the blue, and it's completely unexpected, and it will seem strange, but it's something. It'll be
a message. It'll be a signal. It'll be something that's fairly definitive. You'll know it just because of its quirky nature. Probably it won't make a lot of sense. It'll be hard to grasp it. It could be hard to grasp it mentally, but likely intuition will tell you that it feels correct. You find that you're probably enjoying whatever this is. It's entirely possible that whatever this spark is, it will manifest differently for different people, but it will tend to have the same kind of effect, although there could be degrees of it, and it will be an idea basically that changes your life potentially. There could be different quantities of this information. Um, it should One of the main indicators is that you'll find that it has a huge change in attitude. You probably would have a big change in your sense of self, how you're perceiving reality. Um, and again, when this energy comes in, it might seem a bit edgy, and it might seem trivial. So it's something that you might pick up on your peripheral, and you might get a kick out of it, and you think it's kind of kooky. Um, but it might seem a little bit. It's like it jars you out of your perceived reality. But if you give it some time and don't dismiss it, you should realize how meaningful it is, how useful it is. Um, he recommends, if you want to get a better handle on understanding that energy, reading a book by Kurt. He says that these would be examples of a new way of thinking. Give yourself some time to digest that. Then you'll have a sense of how important it is. And the big takeaway is, he says, if you do that, he says that there should be a tendency that where you get to basically play, and you get to have freedom. You get permission to be, because you're falling. And so what's going to be happening around the 21st or 22nd is this negative form of anarchy. It comes together, and it starts screaming for power, and it's claiming that they have true mastery over everything, and the reality is they don't. And so these collective attacks will make fun of what actually is good. It'll mock what is truly noble, what is like a true king or queen like nature. It will mock true leadership, um, and it will try to diminish that higher energy. So you see this sort of ugly collective representation that wants to be in charge, and it wants basically all the attention on itself. And the way that could manifest, as an example, is you could find yourself in a situation where there's a sudden crazy resurgence of, say, Antifa mobbing, that sort of thing. Um, Now, the extra danger is that around the 23rd, people's minds will be volatile. And even for those that are awake and aware, and they're doing their best to kind of focus on what they should, um, the lower nature of the self can trick the higher mind by providing substitutes for things that matter. And during this time, there's a huge danger of making big mistakes. What I would suggest to you is basically between the 22nd until, at least, don't try not to take any big actions or make important decisions. It's better to wait. Get a lot of rest. Pull back, and don't go seeking advice from basically a very common-minded person. You know, it's a bad time to. What he says is, after the 23rd, there is a really strong demarcation. It's a line drawn in the sand. It's a polarization between the collective crowd and those who don't follow the crowd. And it's a huge turning point for everybody. And he says that the area for opportunity, and where you can really gain in a good way in your life, is through. He says at that time, the 23rd, is it's going to be scary. It'll be a powerful energy demonstrated. There could be conflict. There could be like fights, globally or locally.
And it would be the time where people that are gentle or sensitive or thoughtful or calm could get shaken up. And it's when they get shooken up out of their state that it'd be easier for them to make a mistake. And so that's why I say, try not to make important decisions or take important actions around that time. Probably a lot of people at the time will be timid, fearful. It'll be also kind of like a chaotic kind of distortion in the environment. It'll be agitative. Um, and, one of the things that could happen there is there could be some sort of ploy uh, for people to get fooled into paying too much for, what's claimed to be a cure for something. And one of the ways this will manifest, and it's a good idea to stop and realize that the fear at that time has been artificially magnified. So whatever is you're being compelled to do, you should try not to do it. Okay, so now those are some of the important challenge dates. All right, so the first date that's really important in the month is the 16th, because the 16th and the 17th are they're very important because they indicate the start of a cycle. It's a new moon, and it's very powerful, and its influence is long lasting. Now, it can come in again, plus or minus a few days. So, towards the tail end of the 15th, probably later in the evening, it might start coming in. And it also represents the power of the month in November that's coming up. And it's going to be strange. But that cycle will continue over the next 30 days. So one of the solutions suggested is, he says that at the time, people that are, control freaks are going to start calling other people control freaks. So you'll have all these control freaks that want lots of power and are screaming for it, and then they'll be, screaming at everybody else and calling them that. And basically, it's going to be a lot of people on a megalomania trip. So this energy of the new moon peaks about 14 days after. Further advice is to remain. This is the date where the sort of like the higher idea comes to you. Basically, a first chance of rescue, and it will be like lightning streaking from the sky. Like divine intervention. It's an inspiration, and you should pursue that. So that's probably one of the most important dates of the month, insofar as being able to get yourself, for sure going in the right direction. When that idea or information or whatever it is presented to you, make sure that you're putting enough focus and energy on what that is. Then on the 20th, you have a resurgence of like positive yin female energy. There's a good. It's a good time for fun, laughter, affection, sunshine, warmth. What you'll see, however, especially in the U.S., is kind of like an exhausted, confused state with a lot of deception running amok. So you want to then on the 20th, you should see a continuation of that sort of like happy, fun gentleness if you didn't get caught in the tired confusion and deception from the previous day. So you should gauge that. Pay attention to how you feel on the 20th. Pretty much the best days of the month for the individual. And it will require things like strong, quick choices, a good vision, and there will be inspiration in a new direction. And then we have a very practical, executable, physical, material manifestation of the energy. And, this will include things like innovations and the discovering of something that's new, possibly exotic. You'll have to be courageous. You'll have to be bold, and then go for it. And we'll just take a look at some of the highlights here. So we've got Libra new moon, harshly aspected by three very challenging planets, Mars, Saturn, and Pluto. Could easily result in anger, resentment, frustration, and the abuse of power and authority. Now he says that this new moon does align with two very fortunate stars, so achievement, success are possible if it's channeled the right way. Hard work and determination, but it could be a ruthless quest for power, likely to result in polarization, extremism, conflict, and violence. And the US presidential election on November 3rd falls within this moon phase. So um, this piques my interest since some of the information is very similar to what my mentor was describing. But understand these are two separate systems. So he's looking mainly at the heliocentric. So you get a very different picture of the sky. Whereas people like using mainly a geocentric, so from the perspective of the Earth. And
This is where the parallax view comes in important, because we're seeing similar kinds of qualities described from completely different views for the same time period. Now, one thing that's really good about this particular site is that he goes directly into the detail of the aspects. And the aspects are basically, this is the paint palette that makes up the picture or the painting or the scene of the time. So it's important to read these. We see that there's the moon opposite Mars. And the reason that I'm diving into this a bit more is because this is probably the first node. You know, we talked about nodes or gateways or portals in time and space, where it's like, a very different path can open up to you depending on your state and what you're choosing. So this is a pretty volatile time, and you want to make sure you get through this time correctly. Now, he does offer, clues as to what you should be avoiding, and he also talks about, solutions from his perspective. So the key to dealing with, what should you do? You should be.
okay, I just want to jump into showing you some of the tools I use when I'm doing trend metric forecasting for clients. And we're going to take a look at some of the same time periods that we've been discussing. We're looking at this primarily through the view of a Western astrological tool set, but we'll see that the trends and the dates that we've discussed coming from other sources have an interesting correspondence in this different set of tools. So we're looking at a graph here right now. We see qualities listed on the left. So you can see that there's a bunch of different kinds of qualities that are listed, and then we have a time period of 2 months. We see the time period intersected at the middle. This is November 1st. And the trend for a particular quality is distributed as a horizontal band. So it's a very simplistic but very straightforward chart. So what that means is where we see green, we have basically a positive or harmonious trend for a period of time, and then when we see the red, we see that it's a not harmonious, it's a disharmonious or discordant influence. And so one of the tricks that we look for is we look for distribution horizontally and also vertically in clusters for the same period of time. So you'll recall in the information presented earlier, we saw different trouble spots forming. And so we see here that just past the 21st, so this is the 20th of October. The 20th of October doesn't look too terribly bad. But when we get into the 21st, even though there's still some green holding, and certainly that inspiration, that love inspiration that we saw, it's still holding. There's some kind of an onset coming in, and it's basically spanning the 22nd to the 23rd. So that's one of the tools. And then we've also got this tool here that lets us graph similar energies across, basically, the same kind of timeline. Here we're looking at accident proneness. Now, what that basically means contextually is that to look at how are the finances of Washington D.C. tracking for that time period. So now we're taking a look at the graph over that period of time, and what we see are the instabilities. And you'll see that
Washington, D.C., it takes a hit around the 23rd, again, like we talked about.
Now, I wanted to also just, we're getting more questions about some of our more exotic services, especially by our business and executive class clients. So one of the things that comes up is the question of, well, how can I plan a year or more in advance for certain kinds of activity, or to try to increase the probability of security, wellness, financial stability. So one of the things that we do is we produce fairly sophisticated reports for tracking trend analytics. And this is just an example of the kind of project that we do for some more senior executives. What you'll see here is basically it's a heads up display that shows tracking metrics over a period of time that spans 7 years. And there's a complex series of reports that are accessed through this interface. So one of the things that we'll do is we'll chart, what a financial trend is for a very specific city. So they know when to transact and or habit or operate within. So this is a city in Canada that ticks along, at kind of an average rate for a good time, but we can see that when it gets towards 2025, 2026, it's fairly hazardous. And then we map these, and compare them with completely other cities. And the cities that are selected are based on a personalized approach, because the way that it works is we can determine the power spots for an individual. In other words, determine what cities are best for certain kind of experience or activity. What cities would your best friends be in? What cities would you have the best business opportunity? What cities, would you find to be the most challenging or, uncomfortable or difficult? By having this information, it means you can do short and long range planning a lot more effectively. So what we do is kind of a comprehensive breakdown. So here we've got, for instance, the same kind of trend mapping for the city in Swansea in Wales. And we can see that there's a buildup, a column of energy around 2026, which is really not so pleasant. And then we see, other green clusters spread throughout. This becomes strategically useful because you basically know what we're looking at here is essentially a waveform that's oscillating in certain states over time. So this would be a node of great magnitude. It lasts a long time, and you just ideally don't want to be in that kind of place. So we use this basically for maneuvering. We go through different kinds of comparative analysis. Like, for example, we see here, for this person at this place, the hazard is not as great in 2026. But they take a bit of a beating in 2025. So you see that the oscillation rate, it changes geographically. And then what we'll do is we'll contrast and compare this to other kinds of conventional analytics. So the person's comparing the astrology. We take a look at Swansea, the astrology. We can see the trends here, but then we take a look at real world metrics and we try to get a handle as to what's the current status. So we see in Swansea different kinds of qualities. So this has been cataloged. Different references have been made available, to the client so that they can get in there and check it out. Quality of life metrics. I want to step through a few other resources that you should consider taking advantage of. These are tools, regardless of your level of background or understanding in astrology. These are a good place to start. Many of these resources are free, and all you really have to do is be able to read what's happening at a certain time. And then there's different ways that you can just reference what the meaning of certain kinds of symbols are. So I'm going to just step you through this really quick. This is probably one of the most convenient and simple forms
especially if you're a beginner. Um, this is a calendar that shows the energetic influences for the month.
But we're going to take this simple calendar. We can use it as a general frame of reference, a quick look up throughout the month. But to get more detailed information, we might want to go to a kind of an extended calendar. This is a monthly in-depth calendar that shows a much more detailed view of what's aspecting. Now you'll notice that what we didn't see in the ELSA chart here, so from the 21st to the 23rd, we are seeing a bit more information. But you'll still see that there's nothing listed for October 23rd. And this is really just, there's different providers, different tools that will give you different views of the same time and the same space, but they'll filter or generalize the information down. That's why we don't see it here on the 23rd, because these are just general aspects and pretty much general aspects here. But as we finesse our view, we begin to see a different picture coming into play. Now, this isn't the only thing going on, but it's pretty important, Sun opposite Lilith. And when we look this up, and it's okay, so looking at that, now I want to also just show you the differences in the chart that we're going to see here between the Geo and the Helio. So this is October 23rd, and we can see that these are the planets in the sky. And these lines represent the aspects. So from the perspective of the Earth, this is what's going on. This is what's happening. But when we take a look at the Helio, we see that it's similar but different. Because notice here, this is the geo perspective. So it's assumed essentially that the Earth is at the center of this wheel, and it's observing the angles that are aspecting between the planets on its outside. So this is the Sun. So you'll notice that this is the Sun's position. But when we go to the Helio chart, we have a very different picture. A lot of these planets have moved. Some of them are the same. We see that, in the Geo, we have the position of Mars here and Mercury here. If I take a look using a Helio-only piece of software, again, I can see that the configuration between the Helio, or between the Geo and the Helio, is similar, but it's also different. We have basically different kinds of dynamics going on. And what that means is we're able to see a part of what's actually going on in reality from a different perspective, because here's the Sun at the center. This Helio chart is composed differently. In a proper Helio chart, we have the Sun at the center, which you can see, and it's observing what's going on around it. So we have different clusterings and different angles, and this gives us different clues. And if we take a look at the aspects, we see where some of this danger may be coming in. And this software is free. You can get a trial version of this. It's just called the Heliocentric Planetary Aspects and Transit Software. And there's a link down here.
An ability that we at SOS have to not just spot the critical dates, but also to determine the important specific time windows occurring on that date. So what you're seeing right now is a day chart, and you'll see that there's three horizontal bands. So the first band here is kind of what's happening for a person. Like, what I've done is I've specified it like a personification of the energy representing a specific individual. So usually at the top, this represents an individual. Then the second layer down here, this represents the collective. So that would be what's happening likely environmentally in the region. And then what we have down here is kind of like a summary. It's a summation of the energies. We can look at this different ways as colored bars. And what we do is we use this tool basically to track
energy windows for the time period so that we know what to do with the time. And so a practical use of this would be to get an idea as to what the hot spots for trouble are on the 23rd. This particular day chart is geared towards the sense of vitality, essentially, of the region of Washington, D.C. So usually what we do is we align these horizontal bands with each other. So when we see it like a dark red band, we look to see if there's another dark red band underneath it, because if both of these were coincident, then we've got kind of an energy that's punching through. It would be felt on the collective, and it would be likely experienced by the individual person. So what we can see here is that the person is doing much better than the collective. We see that there's a pulse of thick red energy between roughly 11:50 a.m. till about almost just before noon. There is a faint narrow band. So what this would represent here is that the person would be feeling a degree of distress, but would really notice likely, or there's a good chance that they would be aware of the distress in the environment. When we get to this green band, we see that there's probably a bit more harmony, a bit more vitality. They're feeling better here. And we see that there's a cessation, or at least a muting of the dark red energy happening. And then for the rest of the day, this person is doing relatively fine, but then they feel impacted here, and then they've got pretty much the rest of the evening. But that's one of the sort of like tactical heads up that we use to determine, when is it a good time to do something on the 23rd. So collectively, things are reasonably okay early in the morning, and they're quite good for the person. So if there was something important that the person had to do, they might choose this time period. Whereas you could expect things like, traffic or car accidents or arguments happening during, red bands of time. Okay, so in the next segment, I'm going to be talking to my associate Ralph, and we're going to be discussing how to use this mapping system, but he's also got some fascinating insights as to what are going on for current events in the planet. What kinds of things can we actually expect? And some of the insights are uncanny. Some of them are a little bit scary. Some of them sound really promising. And Ralph's a great speaker, so that's what's coming up next for you guys. So I'm here with my good friend Ralph, who's also a business partner and associate with SOS. And I wanted to share with you the kinds of brainstorming that Ralph and I have done before, and we found really meaningful, frankly, fascinating, exciting, interesting, and certainly, a lot of utility to it. So a lot of very valuable, meaningful information. We're going to be taking a look at the geodetic layer or view. And so I'm going to ask Ralph some questions. Ralph's going to take us on a tour. What we're looking at on the screen right now is a representation of the planet in the current time space. And this map we're seeing has a number of lines that cross, converge, run parallel. They're different colors. You'll see at the top that we have a legend. This is all Ralph's handiwork. Ralph's done an amazing job, and he's just been a super fantastic person to work with. We recommend him to clients. Our clients have been really happy with his work, and we see this as an active, critical instrument in our portfolio of tools for people that really want to have a good tactical and strategic understanding as to what's going on in their environment. Certainly for business, and also certainly for investment. But also just for a sense of personal, well-being, security, opportunity, safety. Really getting a sense for what we can expect to be happening as a qualitative energetic manifestation by region over time. So
Let's just jump in here. First of all, Ralph, I've got this geodetic map up on the screen here, and I wanted to ask you, we know there's different layers to your maps that show different kinds of information. We've talked to our clients in the past just about, transits and, progressions and different kinds of ways, even natal lines to look at the map. But geodetic's something very different from a lot of those other methods. Can you give our viewers just a really quick, easy to understand description as to what are the geodetic colored lines we're looking at? What do they represent?
Yeah, so there's several different systems of mapping astrology onto the planet. The geodetic system basically takes the zodiac degree of a planet. So the easy way to look at it is a planet in 0 degrees Aries is 0 degrees of longitude. And so, and then going around, so something in Gemini is 90 degrees of longitude. And so most of my other maps all show your own personal information. Now, the map we're looking at now and we're going to talk about is the generic information for everyone, and it's the real-time geodetic. So as we speak, every time you refresh this map, it refreshes to the current geodetic thing. One of the things I find really fascinating is that every time I look at what's going on in the current, yeah, you're going to zoom in right there near Washington, D.C. That's good enough right there. It's perfect. So every time I look at what's kind of going on currently, and then I look at the geodetic maps, it's very often coincides. And so it can be a very powerful kind of getting a pulse of what's going on in the world, So, and it's funny, Donald asked me not to be too fatalistic, and then I look at the map and I would be remiss to not have.
Yeah.
And the reason why I want to kind of talk about some concerns is because of what's happening in the world currently right now. And as far as the fact that it's right before the elections in 2020 in the United States. And so if you look at the red line, which represents Mars, and you look at the orange line that represents the sun, and that's east of Washington, D.C. So the Mars is ascendant. That means the rising Mars line and the setting sun line is right east of Washington, D.C. So the thing with the geodetic lines is that they all move eastward.
You mentioned you mentioned some not that you didn't want to sound fatalistic, but you were thinking about things like the upcoming elections, etc. What sorts of, like, when you take a look at what's going across the states right now, if this was a picture or a painting, what do you see happening with these lines?
Well,
where are the areas of concern?
The world is concerned about Washington, D.C. right now. It's like what's going to happen in Washington, D.C. is going to affect pretty much everyone in the world, especially all of us in the United States. So let's just say that's a given. Okay, so then we look at the map and we like, oh, so this potentially could be one of the most violent transitions of power. That's what the news and everyone's trying to tell us. And then we look at the god of war, Mars, the god of aggression, the god of fear, the god of anger, the god of popping off. Mars, sitting there right east of Washington, D.C. And we also know that if you're following astrology at all, Mars is going to be retrograde up until just shortly after the election. That when there's any big violent action in the world, Mars lines are not very far away from a geodetic perspective. The founder of astrocartography, Jim Lewis, noticed that all the United States presidents went to war on their Mars line. If you look at Donald Trump's Mars, it sits over there near China. So we have Mars ascendant, Sun descendant. So we have a Mars-Sun opposition getting ready to hit Washington, D.C. At this time, we already know that there's tension. And so, at first when I saw that, I'm like, okay, that's interesting. And then the part that really scared me, scroll over to Beijing,
Okay.
Donald.
All right.
Scroll east to Beijing. Just keep on scrolling. You might want to zoom in and zoom out or scroll either way, but keep on scrolling all the way over to Beijing and then zoom in.